The other day, I was watching Batman the Animated Series from 1992. Primarily because at this point I am within a monomolecular wafer's distance from simply giving up on all modern entertainment. A sentiment I suspect a fair few of you might share with me after today's video, as after one particular episode I felt the need to Google the name Nora Fries. And, well, suffice to say, the first thought that entered my mind upon seeing her modern-day interpretation was how far we have fallen. But let's go easy on the foreshadowing for the moment and swing on back to the point. As I was watching, I soon of course arrived at episode 3 of the animated series, the now rightly legendary Heart of Ice, which introduced Victor Fries, now more famously known as Mr. Freeze, to the animated universe, and what an introduction it was, as Heart of Ice is truly a remarkable piece of entertainment, near perfect on every level, from writing to voice acting to animation to music. There is a very good reason it won an Emmy Award back when that actually meant something. And more impressively, back during a time when animated shows were considered lesser than traditional live-action performances. It even achieved a miracle we have very rarely ever seen since: a genuine improvement on a character, turning Mr. Zero, a clownish and not at all particularly imposing Batman villain of an older and sillier time, into not only an intimidating red-eyed badass, but a villain with a story, as Mr. Freeze was quite the exception to the Batman's usual rogues gallery. He did not commit his crimes in the name of wealth or power or simple madness. He became a cold-hearted monster for love. Because you see, the biggest change from Mr. Zero was the creation of Nora Fries, his loving wife, suffering from an incurable disease that could only be put in check by cryogenically freezing her. Luckily, Victor was a leading expert in just that field, and working for GothCorp, he was able to successfully create a cryogenic chamber, into which Nora was placed. But Victor's boss wasn't too pleased by all of this. Ferris Boyle, the CEO of GothCorp, had ordered the experiment cancelled weeks ago, and it had already cost him millions more after Victor had refused to shut down the experiment. And so, Boyle was coming to shut it down himself, regardless of the fact that bringing Nora out of cryogenic suspension now would inevitably kill her. None too surprising, Victor took issue with this and nabbed a gun from one of the security guards and used it to threaten Boyle. But Victor was still far too naive, and Boyle tricked him into lowering his weapon, after which Boyle kicked him onto a table with experimental chemicals, leaving him for dead, but instead causing Victor's transformation into Mr. Freeze. Now incapable of feeling warmth or emotions, or of surviving outside of a sub-zero environment, and believing that his wife died in the lab, Mr. Freeze fixates on taking revenge with a gigantic ice cannon, and is only stopped at the last moment by Batman. For the time, and especially for the medium, bearing in mind that comics were a hell of a lot sillier back then than they are today, this was groundbreaking. An evil villain that plots to kill dozens in the name of revenge has a sympathetic rationale, and a good one? Hell, his justification is love. Isn't love supposed to conquer all? Isn't any action taken in the name of love supposed to be, automatically justified or something? And in the end, Mr. Freeze doesn't get his revenge. The bad guy lives. To go to jail, sure, but so is Fries. And now that his wife, his loving, dear darling, is presumably dead, he just gives up. His only reason for existence is gone, and the last shot of him is the man incapable of feeling warmth, crying in his cell. Man, it was a masterpiece. And so, naturally poisoned by the stench of modernity, I thought to myself, wow, I wonder how they've fucked this up today. Thus, even knowing that only pain awaited me, I, as mentioned, typed out the name Nora Fries into Google and hit enter. And there she was, Mrs. Fries with a tramp stamp on her ass, flashing people at the airport. Oh boy. And this was, of course, obviously, unavoidably the merest tip of the iceberg. As after Nora was unfrozen, she turned into an enormous slut, banging every man and bush she could get her hands on. And just to hammer the desecration home with the force of 1,000 sodomites in the final days of Gomorrah, this is Nora after Mr. Fries gave his own life willingly to cure her of her disease. And again, all I could think of as I continued to watch this crime against decency and propriety play out before my eyes was, my God, how far we have fallen. We have gone from a heart of ice, a beautiful tale of love turned cold and dark, and instead, well, I think Nora herself puts it the best.
Oh, so you'll be the first person to come back from a business conference without chlamydia? Okay.
What could one possibly add to such Shakespearean heights of writing? There simply does not exist adequately derogatory language in the secular speech of our modern world for the sheer earth-splitting magnitude of the sacrilege on display here. And that is, of course, the intent of the show. The express intent. The very point is desecration. As this is Nora from the Harlequin series, in which Harley decides that Mr. Fries is holding Nora against her will. So she unfreezes Nora and breaks Mr. Freeze's gun, thus dooming Nora to death. Yeah. Feeling at least mildly bad about this, she says whoops after all. Harley then calls up her girlfriend, Poison Ivy, which then utilizes her female plot powers in this emphatically left-wing show to figure out a cure to Nora's incurable disease beyond all powers of modern medicine, both Mr. Freeze's and Batman's, in about 15 seconds flat. The only hitch is that the cure cannot be injected into Nora directly. It must be injected into someone else, and then a full blood transfusion must be carried out from that person to Nora, a process that will kill the donor. Our heroes fear that Mr. Freeze will force one of them to do it, but no, Mr. Freeze willingly undergoes this treatment, even injecting himself with the formula that will kill him to save his beloved wife, Nora. It is the closest thing any left-wing show has ever gotten to an emotional scene. And painfully aware of this, the writers hurry on over to do their level best to ruin it, with jokes, shifting the focus away from the noble self-sacrifice onto Harley and her relationship troubles with Poison Ivy. Literally, whilst Nora Fries is crying over the dead cold corpse of her husband, Harley and Ivy bitch about their old boyfriends. And so it is after this episode, where Harley forces Mr. Freeze to kill himself or watch his wife die before his eyes, that Nora becomes best friends with Ivy and Harley and starts banging boys and beasts like it's a pride festival. So yeah, the show is it's left-wing satire, which is about the most damning judgment I could possibly ever make of anything. As all left-wing satire revolves completely around the idea of taking the thing it is, with heavy quotation marks, satirizing, in this case, the DC universe, and then grinding it up into cat food, feeding it to a gaggle of dysentery-ravaged dachshunds, taking the resultant explosive detritus and putting it on a platter before serving it to you, maybe with a biscuit shaped as a curse word as an hors d'oeuvre. Long story short, if you're not already going to sleep with audio recordings of Mao's little red book on repeat and resting your head on a smash the patriarchy pillow, you're not going to be in the correct ideological headspace to enjoy this show much. But this is of course the problem with the whole multiverse thing. Everything is canon now. And so, in the utter absence of an actual Batman show, for years, decades in fact now, this is the official DC animated universe right now. And believe me, I wish it was not so. Switching back and forth between Batman the Animated Series and Harley Quinn to make this video was traumatizing. Like dining on the finest cut of perfectly done steak one moment and haphazardly exploded yak testicles with a side of broken glass the next. But I'm not here to critique the lack of quality in the Harley Quinn show. The date it was created does that perfectly well already. Instead, I want to talk about what this whole thing reminded me of. Another left-wing cultural moment, one only marginally messier than the one we're currently suffering through now. The French Revolution. I know, sounds like a bit of a segue, but not really, for whilst the happy guillotine did probably cause a few more deaths than our time's hubbub, a lot of the ideas underpinning it bear a strong resemblance to the cultural Marxism of today. Most pertinent to Nora Fries as the desecration of everything good and sacred is this charming little French lad right here. Donatien Alphonse Francois du Sade, or as he is better known today, Marquis du Sade. He was an author and wrote such titillatingly titled books as The 120 Days of Sodom and Philosophy in the Bedroom. But he is probably most famous for the two books Justine and its sequel, of sorts, Juliette. The central theme of these literary works were rape, torture, murder, cannibalism, erotic cannibalism, and of course copious quantities of child abuse. And most overriding of all, injustice. As the books are about two sisters, one who is good and honest and meets with absolutely nothing but bad luck and misery in her life, the purest, most crystalline form of torture porn, and the other sister, which is pure, undiluted evil of the most explicitly fetishistic kind, who meets with nothing but happiness and luck. This seems an opportune moment to point out that Marquis de Sade, the latter part that is the origin points of the word sadism. Though even that really does fail to illustrate just how twisted this Frenchman was. We're not going to go too deep into it here because, well, most of his ideas are not YouTube friendly, but the crux of de Sade's philosophy was that the old world was based on a series of political assumptions that together formed normal life or normalcy, one of which was the monarchy, and the monarch himself who was appointed by God to rule the nation in his name. The French Revolution, of course, proved quite dramatically so that God's chosen could actually quite easily be unchosen by a large enough mob of God's peasantry. In de Sade's mind, then, this indicated that all the old rules were now defunct. The old normal had failed, and thus had to be replaced by a new normal. And that new normal should naturally be, at least in his eyes, the opposite of the old normal. As the old normal was based largely on Christian morality, de Sade thus decided to go as far as possible in the opposite direction. Pleasure was no longer a vice, it was a virtue, and the further you went from the old normal morality, the better it was. So, for example, simply refusing to be charitable to the needy and taking pleasure in the act of refusing charitability to someone poor, like knowing that you have money but you don't give it to a beggar asking for it, that act was pleasure level 1. And remember the previous list of topics of his books, rape, torture, etc., ending with child abuse? Apply all of those previous things to children, and there you have de Sade's highest level of pleasure, thus morality. The dude was a piece of work and would eventually die locked up in an insane asylum. Hey, you know what? If anyone deserves to be there. But not to delve too much further into the quite deserved fate of the Marquis, doesn't all of this sound just a little familiar? A philosopher that concludes society's norms are all interwoven to create a normal sense of morality, a morality that the philosopher finds unfair and deeply oppressive, and who then moves to reshape society by not only presenting a fundamentally different and opposite system of morality, but also by actively denigrating and debasing the values, virtues, and heroes of the preceding system. Nora Fries is the current day's Justine and Juliette, where just like Justine, she is meant to show the misfortune of virtue. The love as represented by Victor Fries, the willingness to sacrifice anything and everything for his wife, is debased and turned into a less than pointless sacrifice. It is meant to show that the good guys don't always win, and that even something as selfless and honorable as an act of that of a husband giving his life for his beloved wife can be turned into debauchery. And like Juliette, Nora also shows vice amply rewarded. By living a selfish and hedonistic life, Nora is not only successful, but is taken under the wing of the very same woman that killed her husband. Nora is made the personal assistant to a top executive and never seems to be wanting for food or luxuries evermore, as her primary obsessions is to satisfy her immediate urges for food and sex. Now, to be clear, I am not drawing a direct comparison between the philosophies of our pervy Frenchman to that of a certain failed Italian revolutionary, but I am pointing out that both of them applied the exact same tools, albeit to widely differing effects. De Sade was considered a deviant pervert even by his fellow French revolutionaries. And tragically, Gramsci is still not anywhere near as universally despised as he should be. Nevertheless, both of them chose to strike at what they perceived as the established system in order to undermine it and bring about their own preferred system by denigrating and devaluing the values of the system they were targeting. Nora Fries was supposed to be the perfect rose, the ideal woman in whose name any action, any sacrifice was warranted and justified. What could be more old school and chivalrous than that? The knight in shining armor, even if it is a bit on the frosty side, seeking revenge for his wronged damsel. And therein, of course, lies the problem. In the current year, you cannot have a woman be an ancillary character. You cannot have a woman be a man's motivation. The woman must be a strong and independent girl boss who needs no man. But even then, Mr. Freeze's sacrifice still has value. His actions in her name still has value. And we can't have that, which is why we need to ruin the reason why Mr. Freeze took those actions. We must ruin Nora's value as a woman and a wife. Enter Tramp Stamp Chlamydia Nora, the Nora whose only interest in life is getting dicked and getting stuffed. This is the end of the left wing's moral spectrum. This is their hero. This is what they do to a heart of ice. For no other reason than because its purity offends them on a deep, personal, and private level, as they see something good, something virtuous, and they know they are not it. Thus, they have to destroy it. And destroy it they most certainly have. I would also be remiss, incidentally, to point out that this is not the only modern iteration of Nora Fries. This is the worst one, in my opinion, but there is another one as well. In this other iteration of Nora Fries, she is also cured, but not in quite the same cured way. Instead, she is turned into an entity much like Mr. Freeze. She then quickly declares that Mr. Freeze's love is too much for her, that it is suffocating, that she literally needs no man, tries to kill Mr. Freeze, and then leaves him so she can become a supervillain. Again, the point I am making here is that Nora Fries in Harlequin is not a unique phenomenon to Harlequin. Nora being ruined is not as a result of Harlequin being satire. It is the inevitable thought process of the current year woke mindset. This is what they do. This is what they do to every hero they get their hands on. Because that is what their religion demands they do. Which is yet another excellent reason why you should reject it at every single solitary turn. For whilst we have fallen far, it is examples like Nora Fries that might just hopefully allow us to see just how deep we have fallen. This might not be rock bottom just yet, but I feel like we're getting there. Until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon.